Do. Welcome back to Arguing Semantics. Today we are going to be talking about Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. Now, right off the bat, before we get into the description, I want to address the controversies with this film. I personally felt, as an aspiring movie journalist, that it was important for me to have an opinion on this movie. That's why I went to see it. I fully understand the move to boycott it, both with the controversy with J.K. Rowling and the controversy with Johnny Depp. I'm not really going to get into either of those here, just recognizing that there are controversies here, and as such, I'm going to go into full spoilers through this entire review. So if you have no desire to see it, I totally understand those criticisms, but yeah, I'm just going to get into all of it. So I have seen it, so you don't have to. All right. So that being said, let's just get into Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. With Gellert Grindelwald rising in power and slowly coming out of the shadows, Albus Dumbledore once again recruits Newt Scamander, Jacob Kowalski, and other allies, old and new, to prevent a plot that would see Grindelwald gaining control and bringing the Muggle and Wizarding worlds to their knees. If that description seems overly simplistic, it kind of is. There really isn't a whole lot to the general plot. It's just a story of Gellert Grindelwald trying to gain control over the international wizarding world in order to bring his war to the Muggles. And then Dumbledore basically putting a bunch of plans in motion that would stop that. In fact, that is one of the best things about the movie, is the setup's really, really good. But I'll get to that in a bit. Overall, this movie is not that good. You really don't need to see it. In levels of overall quality, it's definitely better than The Crimes of Grindelwald, but not as good as the first one. It's just kind of where Crimes of Grindelwald had some just straight up really bad storytelling in it. This one feels completely superfluous as a story. Nothing really advances by the end of it. But that being said, let's get into some of the things I did actually like. As always, the costuming and art direction are fantastic. That is the one thing that David Yates has continued to bring to the series, is solid art direction. He's not the best, but he's also not the worst director that the Wizarding World films have had. But he has a style and he has a vision. This one just felt the most like by the numbers, and they were just going through the motions. So, filling out the 5-film plot. But other than that, it's like I said, he does at least bring a style to the films. There are a lot of really funny and cute moments, mostly between Jacob Kowalski and various characters, as well as some knowing glances between characters and different things like that that do make the movie endearing. It does have some fun moments, and it's in those that you see what the potential of this franchise could have been, and they just never managed to get there. There are also some decent action sequences you would expect at this point, but most of them are things that we have seen before and don't really bring anything new to the table. They're good, but they're not amazing. And then there are some really, really cool sets and set pieces. The architecture in the Wizarding World is always great, and the events that bring them to some of the different locations is really, really cool, as well as some truly excellent special effects and creature designs throughout the films. They're also kind of what you expect at this point. One of the best things about these movies is how well they handle their CG and the monster designs. For a movie called Fantastic Beasts, there really are some fantastic beasts in here. But the biggest problem with the visuals is that they can often come off as muddy. There are so many things happening on screen during the action sequences, so many particle effects, so many things flying through the air, that oftentimes the visuals you kind of lose what's going on. It's not as bad as, say, Morbius was, but it still could have been a lot better. Maybe needed to tone it down just a little bit. It also has a very desaturated tone, which we've gotten used to in these films. At this point, I'm just kind of bored by how the films look from a color standpoint. They always are kind of just dark and moody, and I'm like, there's joy to be had in this universe. You know that, right? You can make that feel. It oftentimes comes at the cost of the tone, which sometimes has these more joyous moments, and then the visuals just make you depressed and bored. Yeah, and then as well as just the fact that the the weather is always overcast and cloudy and cold looking. It just I'm just getting kind of tired of the aesthetic that they have been pushing with these movies. The other thing I will say is that the performances overall were really good. Eddie Redmayne continues to be an excellent anchor for the film. And while the way they got him back into the movie, Jacob Kowalski is still one of the best parts of this movie. He's a great audience stand-in. He's incredibly fun. He's very endearing. I'm glad they figured out how to bring a way to bring him back. It was so hackneyed and forced in the last movie. It just did not work. But I'm glad he's here. He's great. The rest of the cast is good. The people that you know from before still give good performances. Of the new characters, Lally is good, but her introduction was incredibly weird. It felt very forced and unnecessary. It was a lot of effort to get Jacob back into the story. I felt like they could have done it much simpler and easier and cut like another 5 minutes out of the film, which is the other thing is this movie was too long, but I'll get to that later. It just felt awkward why they did it that way to show him, you're a good person. We need you, even though why? The introduction of Albus's brother Aberforth was great. He is wonderfully gruff and adds a nice juxtaposition with Dumbledore and his good-naturedness. I like that they finally gave Newt's assistant something to actually do. She was great in this movie. Her ending up being the ringer in the plot was really, really great. Yeah, overall, really good performances. The other thing I want to say with the performances is I like how they play Newt as neurodivergent. There's a lot to be said about putting neurodivergent characters in movies in general, but I like that they do it subtly here. And the other thing that they do is they never treat the fact that he is different as a negative. It's always shown to be an advantage or valuable. It makes him who he is and it makes him a good person, and that's why he's important. It's great. However, on a very different note, once again, going back to because of events that have happened in the real world, Johnny Depp was taken off this film. I'm not going to get into any of that here. But he was replaced with Mads Mikkelsen, which is an interesting choice for sure. And if they had started there, would have been wonderful. But the problem is they made absolutely zero effort to make him feel like the same character at all. The Mads Mikkelsen version of Grindelwald is a completely different person. And I personally didn't like it as much. Although a lot of people did have complaints about Johnny Depp's over-the-top portrayal of Grindelwald, I think it worked in this movie, especially going into this movie where a lot of the plot revolves around a literal political election. Johnny Depp's version of Grindelwald came off as an over-the-top groundswell. I'm going to get all these people around me just from pure over-the-top charisma politician type. And Mads Mikkelsen's more subdued, more detached performance, while excellent for a villain, felt out of place there for me. But that being said, it all just comes down to, for me, it's like you cast a completely different actor from the last one. You made no effort to make him feel like the previous character. It just feels slapped together, which is another big problem with this movie, is the entire plot feels slapped together. Like they rushed the script out so that they could get the next movie made, which is weird when you're talking about a film franchise that has 5 movies planned, and this entire plot just feels completely ancillary. Specifically, the plot is, with Gellert now having escaped and gaining political power, there also happens to be an election for the International Wizarding Council, which I feel like is something they pulled out of their ass for the movie. I'm not the biggest Harry Potter fan. I would count myself as on a range of 1 to 5, I'm a 2 to a 3 Harry Potter fan. Read the books when I was a kid, read them into adulthood, really enjoyed them, watched all the movies, really enjoy them, and I have just enough working knowledge to be a fan of the world that was built and to recognize some of the flaws within it, but I never made it part of my personality. But that being said, I feel like that just kind of came out of nowhere for this movie. But anyway, he puts himself into a place where he gets pardoned and he is now up for this election. Meanwhile, there is a subplot where a magical animal actually helps choose those people because it can see within them and bows to a truly good person, and that person gets the most votes, usually. It's a really weird ritual. They never totally explain it. They don't explain how the election works. They don't explain what the Wizarding Council is in charge of. It's just, there's a lot of really, really bad world building in this movie. It, like I said, that's why it feels so slapdash and just kind of like, here's a plot. And then in the background of this then being that Dumbledore sets all of these characters consisting of Newt, Jacob, Newt's brother Theseus, a new wizard Lally, the Yusuf Kama from the previous movie, and Newt's assistant, all on these separate tasks that none of them know what's going on, none of them know what the ultimate plan is, in order to foil these various attempts. And throughout the movie, they seem like they're kind of going right and kind of going wrong, but they never feel like they're moving to an endpoint. It's just to show you the details and then put in a set piece that doesn't actually add anything to the story. Everything just kind of happens in this movie. It doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. And then the other subplot being the vastly underutilized Ezra Miller as Credence, although now he has his own set of problems as well as an actor. Not going to get into those, but I feel like they could easily write him out of the next one the way this one was ending. They just didn't do anything with him. He is tasked to kill Dumbledore, and Dumbledore has a couple of conversations with him. You know, they have kind of a cool fight that looks interesting, but once again, it's kind of muddy. It just... He doesn't really do that much, and then he changes sides at the end for reasons. He just decides that Dumbledore is telling the truth and decides to take his side. Though, I will say, with a movie called The Secrets of Dumbledore, they do actually get into some of the secrets of Dumbledore, and many of them are actually interesting. You find out more about his past, about his relationship with Grindelwald. You know, you find out the fact that he was actually originally on the side of Grindelwald and that they were going to take down the Muggles, but due to events, he changed his mind and became a better person. Specifically, in a fight between him, his brother, and Grindelwald, one of them accidentally killed Albus's sister. Once again, full spoilers, I said it at the beginning. Which is a really interesting reveal and says a lot about his character. All these little details they give are interesting. Also, finding out that Credence, aka Aurelius Dumbledore, isn't their brother, but Aberforth's son, was a really interesting twist that they did almost nothing with, other than to give Aberforth a reason to kind of fight at the end a little bit. But yeah, that part of it was good. I feel like they didn't utilize those secrets into the overall plot enough, but it worked. The other big reveal, obviously, being the assumed but never completely confirmed fact that Dumbledore was actually in love with Grindelwald. And while they do address it in here, I did like that overall they kind of just said it without making a big deal of it. But at the same time, it also felt like it was understated a little bit too much. They did enough for audiences who wanted it to be there that it was there, but they didn't do so much of it that it felt like they couldn't cut it out of the cut for countries where that would be a bad thing, which is exactly what they did. So it kind of feels like a half measure. It was nice, but didn't do as much of it what they could. And then the biggest problem with this series as a whole continues to be the best part of the Fantastic Beasts franchise are the Fantastic Beasts. So why aren't they focused on the Fantastic Beasts? They put all this work into creating these really cool monsters and these really cool beasts and these really cool creatures and all of these things around it, and making the zoologist who's trying to categorize them and help them. And then the entire plot is focused around the wizarding world in a story that we kind of already know how it's going to go and how it's going to end. It's really, really frustrating. The opening scene of this movie where he is helping an animal give birth and then he's trying to protect it and the baby from a bunch of wizards who are trying to attack it is absolutely wonderful. And that's where I was hoping it was going to go. And then it just kind of stopped being that very quickly. Just very, very frustrating that this series had so much potential and it's just a darker version of the other plots, which it actually gets really dark in this movie. There is some pretty violent stuff that happens at various points that just felt weird and out of place. Specifically, there is a prison scene that you've seen in the trailers with the moving around and getting past those things. How that big creature deals with people is kind of gross and felt really, really weird for this project. Yeah, it's tonally all over the place. But yeah, it's also nice to see in this universe the different parts of the magical world that they're trying to create. The only problem is that the vast majority of them have all been urban areas. So we had New York, and then we had Paris, and then we had Munich was kind of the main place here. And although we do get a kind of Asian area later in the film, but it's very brief, which was also really cool. The illusory bridge that happens at that point was really interesting stylistically, but overall the movies are just kind of starting to feel the same because it's always big stone buildings and cobblestone streets and the political machinations of Grindelwald, and none of it's really feeling unique or interesting from movie to movie. It's just very, very samey. And then going back to the plot with the election, it was a great idea. And the setup of all of these characters having something to figure out about the election without them knowing exactly what the plan is was really great. The setup was awesome. But throughout the movie, you're never given enough of the stakes to really understand what's happening. You don't understand. They never tell you why the International Council's a big deal or what controlling them would lead to. You never know who these other candidates are, so when one of them gets picked at the end, it's like, oh, okay, cool, that one, I guess. Like I said, the ritual and the voting are never explained properly. You never really understand why you should care. The stakes are never fully raised other than we have to stop Grindelwald from getting control. That's literally it. But they never tell you how he has control or what that control would be. There are a lot of plot threads that just kind of don't go anywhere. While, like I said, it was cool that everybody had their own tasks, half those tasks fail, and you never understand what the goal of the task was in the first place, other than, like, one, it was an assassination attempt, but there apparently was some other stuff that they needed to stop. It was weird. And then the whole Yusuf Kama subplot could have completely been cut out of the movie. It didn't go anywhere. It felt like they were going to do a bunch of interesting stuff, but he kind of goes to be the inside man at Grindelwald's, but then never does anything, and then at the end switches sides so that he can protect them briefly, but they were building up that he wouldn't choose it, and there was like, that was the only question. So his whole subplot could have been cut, which is one of the big things with this movie, is it feels like they could have cut like 30 minutes out of it. There were so many dangling plot threads that didn't go anywhere. It was just a little bit too long. It was about, I think it was 2:22 is what it came out to, and it probably could have been under 2 hours and been a better film. It just kind of dragged and was filled with stuff that wasn't very cool. However, there were some really cool scenes. The briefcase scene was fun at the end of the movie. It's all of them trying to get a briefcase to the election ceremony, and that's all worked out really well. Finding out that the briefcase were all traps and how those different traps worked was really cool and made for some fun visuals, even if the fight scene before it was kind of lackluster. That being said, once again, there were a series of references that were made for no reason. It didn't add anything. Like, they went to the room of requirement again just so they could have another port key that they didn't need. They could have done it in literally any other way, but they made it in the room of requirement just for the sake of referencing the room of requirement. And there was also some really, really sloppy world building. Like, at a point in the movie, Lally uses a port key that is a book to transport her and Jacob to the train that everybody else is on. But the problem is when they get to the train, they come out of the fireplace with green fire. That's not how port keys work. Am I wrong? Port keys just bring you to a place and then you pop up there with said port key in hand. The fire is the Flu Network, which is a completely different thing. So they got like a really basic part of the world wrong, like right away at the beginning of the movie. Very frustrating. The henchmen for Grindelwald were like menacing, but they were underdeveloped and never felt like too much of a threat because they were always easily defeated. So Grindelwald never really felt like much of a threat in this movie, as much as they built him up. Ultimately, the movie is mostly just boring. It is the middle movie I've ever seen. It's like, we just need to close the gap. So the plot, nothing has ultimately changed from the beginning of the plot to the end, other than some superficial things. It ends with Grindelwald still being chased, but for different reasons. Credence switches sides, and Queenie switches sides back. That's it. That is the only changes by the end of and Dumbledore no longer has his magical thing that will stop him from attacking Grindelwald. That's it. Those are the changes. And while there are some interesting implications for those things, it didn't feel like the plot earned any of those things, per se. Although Queenie was great in this, she always had this little weird twitch in her eye, but they never fully justified her switching sides. She just went from, I'm 100% on board with Grindelwald, to, I'm not in this movie and I'm scared of what he's going to do, even though she knew what he was going to do. It was weird. Yeah, this movie just does very little to move the overall plot of the series forward. It was mostly superficial advances or a series of musical chairs, people just moving places, but nothing good happened out of it. So to wrap up my thoughts, overall, as I've said many points at this point, Secrets of Dumbledore is just a very meh film. For everything they did that was cool or interesting or funny or just generally fun to watch, there was something else in it that was like, why is this happening? Why did you do this way? I don't get it. I don't get what you were going for. And the plot just kind of spinning in place didn't add anything to the story either. I would be interested to know where the story would go after this for sure. I'm definitely a completionist in the fact that I want them to finish the movies just so I can know how the story ends, the overall plot. But at the same time, they have just been so consistently mediocre, and knowing that Warner Brothers is having a hard time with how they want to handle these films moving forward, I would not be surprised if this movie did not make its money back and this series would either be canceled or relegated to like an HBO Max quick movie to wrap up the story just so you didn't piss off the Harry Potter fans. This one was just, it's not good. It's not horrible. It's watchable, but you don't need to. And considering that the subject matter and its creator are very controversial at the moment, you really don't need to go out of your way. So anyway, that being said, I also want to thank everybody because one of my last videos was my first video to go over 1,500 views, which makes me very, very happy. I want to thank everybody who watched that video. I was very proud of that review. Loved the movie for everything, everywhere, all at once. But that being said, wrapping this up, my name is James, and this has been Arguing Semantics.
Like and subscribe.